Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Mark My Brain. Today's episode will be all about fear and how to deal with fear. Expect to learn the general principles of dealing with fear, as well as specific tactics I've used in my own life to overcome my fears. Everybody is afraid of something and deals with his or her own challenge or challenges in this regard. Fear of failure, fear of embarrassing yourself, fear of opening up in a relationship, fear of uncertainty, of death, or fear of not being enough. The list goes on, and I'm sure you can think of an example from your own life. From my point of view, the challenge of life then is that the things we want, our ambitions, dreams, the fulfilled life we imagine, more often than not lie on the other side of the things we fear. From my point of view, it's then our mission to muster the courage and overcome our fears. It's sort of a responsibility we have towards ourselves. At least that's how I feel. The question, of course, is how? Because in an extreme example, fear can be absolutely paralyzing. For example, you are so afraid of choosing wrong that you end up not choosing at all. Or you become so afraid of getting rejected by girls that you end up not speaking to any. And even if it's something rationally trivial, that you might say, oh, why am I even afraid? Oh no, I don't feel like this. You're almost embarrassed to admit it. I think that you should never belittle it. At the end of the day, fear is an emotion, and if you feel that way, it's real, it's valid. And I wouldn't try to hide away or run away from it, because that doesn't solve anything. Rather, I would just acknowledge that it's there, it's real, and with that you can start working on it. Because the most important thing, or like the super important point I think about fear, is that you should never let it control your life. you know and ultimately the result of your work in this area should be that you hopefully overcome it. So yeah, let's take a look at some tactics I would say I've used to deal with imminent as well as abstract, I would say, fears in my own life. The first one is sort of a change of a mindset or change of lenses through which you look at certain things. One of the most common fears I think and I see in my circle is the fear of rejection, fear of failure, and these things. And I think it's sort of natural that we people try to avoid failure and rejection because it comes with negative emotions, so that we sort of start to fear it because, of course, we don't like negative emotions. But I would ask yourself a question: how many failures before a success? Or how many no's before a yes? And the point is that you can look at things, for example, the success, whether it be in a relationship, in business, as a result of continuously getting, for example, rejected, or accumulating failures until you come across the success. And you can tell yourself, for example, okay, so after 20 failures, then there will be the success. Or after, I don't know, 30 rejections or 30 failed dates or whatever, I will find the one. And through this lens, of course, you can do some statistics to back up the numbers. But through these lenses, each failure or rejection then becomes a step towards a success. rather than away from it, as might be the initial subconscious reaction to rejection or failure. I think it's a very effective change of mindset, mainly because it is sort of true. Many, for example, business or successful business owners will tell you that they had several failures or failed businesses before they hit it big. These failures allow you to learn hands-on, which is often invaluable, next to the point of being sort of a stepping stone towards the right direction. So yeah, this is sort of an easy mindset change. You can look at the things you fear, if it's rejection, if it's failure, um, through the lenses of, okay, it's another rejection, towards the success. It's another step on my journey. The second tactic or principle I would like to bring your attention to is that I think you should exercise your courage muscle, And literally, as with exercising a muscle in the gym, you don't go straight for, I don't know, benching 120 kilos without any training. You start at a level that's adequate to your skill level. And I think that the same principle can be applied here. And of course, maybe in many other cases. If you are so afraid of certain thing that you feel completely overwhelmed and paralyzed by it, tone it down. Start small, build with baby steps. You can even decide to make it a habit. Every day, do something that scares you a little. That's just a bit outside your comfort zone, and that you would normally be reluctant to do. And I think that continuously overcoming these challenges allows you to build momentum, courage, and even confidence in this area, which ties nicely to the next tip: create momentum for yourself. And I think that the momentum can be long term, like we just talked about, consistently exercising your ability to overcome fear, or short term, for example, in a single day. If you need to do something that scares you, right beforehand, you can do things that will boost your morale or confidence. For example, I don't know, a cold shower, a workout, some other productive thing. And in the perspective of all the other things you have done and overcome, the thing you fear becomes less intense. At least that's what I've found. And I have used this tactic, for example, for exams. If I have a uni exam in the afternoon, I'm not going to just sit around overthinking the whole day, waiting for it to come. I usually try to do other productive things beforehand, ideally an intense workout, prepare something for some other projects, etc. Here, I don't think it has to be strictly about activities in which you overcome your fears. That is perhaps more important over the long term. But I found that anything productive or meaningful really helps break down the fear paralysis that would be otherwise only building up if you were just sitting around doing nothing. And the overarching point again is perhaps to simply not let the fear of something hold you from other activities that you want to do and enjoy. And again, this allows you to sort of create momentum so then you can just crash through whatever is at the end of the day or whatever is the big challenge in front of you. Next tip: break down a big thing into manageable pieces, tasks. I think you've probably heard about this one, maybe not in this context, but I think that's a principle that applies very widely in our lives. We've already touched a bit on it, big things like dreams, ambitions, or even something more concrete like changing careers can be super overwhelming, which often paralyzes us into inaction or avoidance. However, if you break it down and split it into individual steps, I think that immediately it becomes less intimidating. And again, the next tip or principle perhaps ties into this nicely, and that is to consciously disassociate. You can write down what you need to do, perhaps after you've broken down the big thing into smaller tasks. You write them down, and then, just like a robot, you follow the written instructions. And I found that it's super useful actually. Do I think it's the healthiest approach to dealing with fear? Probably not, but it does get things done, and sometimes that's the priority. Not to mention you can use this tactic for the first steps on your journey. To start doing things you're afraid of and start building momentum, just as we talked in the previous points. So these were the 5 tips or principles I have had prepared for you, which worked very well in my own life. And ultimately, all of these points, tactics, work well together. Let me give you a scenario. There is a big thing in your life that you need or want to do but are completely terrified to. And at this point in time, just thinking about it fills you with cold. You immediately feel overwhelmed and completely paralyzed. So you begin by breaking this huge undertaking into smaller, manageable tasks that create the trajectory you have to take. But perhaps still the first step just feels like too much. Okay, never mind. You make overcoming fear a habit that you practice regularly in other areas of your life. With that, you start building momentum and confidence. And if you sometimes get, again, overwhelmed by something, you write it down very specifically what you need to do and then just blindly follow this to-do list. It's easier than to face the tasks completely on your own. Now at least you have a tool, a walking stick you can use for support. You continue building towards your ultimate goal, and as you remain on the path, you find yourself to be braver and less weighed down by things that previously scared and overwhelmed you. You almost welcome rejections and failures that you encounter along the way, because now you view them simply as stepping stones, not something you should try to avoid. You continue building momentum, and when you come face to face with your final task, the thing you feared so much, you might still be afraid, terrified even, but you will find that your courage is greater, and with the help of the tools you've built along the way, you are able to overcome this challenge. How cool does that sound, right? A point I want to reiterate is that it's extremely important to not let the fear, any fear, control you and your life. You acknowledge it, and then through exposure and action, challenge it and hopefully overcome it. That's, in my opinion, the best way to deal with fear. And with that, I think this episode has come to an end. I hope that I've given you some useful tips and tricks to dealing with fear. Perhaps I've even inspired you. And for your own life, I wish you good luck with any dealings and challenges you have. And I wish you courage. I think there's more in it in you than you know. So, yeah, hear you next time. Bye.